We're going to move on to item number 4. Yes?
Yes.
Fiscal year 2021 Growth Management Plan Monitoring Report.
All right, thank you, Chair Gokin and members of the Traffic and Mobility Commission. I'm Nathan Schmidt, the Transportation Planning and Mobility Manager. For this item, this is the fiscal year 2020-2021 Growth Management Plan Monitoring Report, the circulation section approach. So the recommended action is to receive the presentation today and provide input on the approach for the FY 2021 report. So this is actually the second time the Commission has reviewed our approach to the report. It was originally reviewed on November 2nd, 2020. We are now returning to the Commission to follow up with you all on some of the comments that received and to provide a second review of the approach and get your final feedback before we move forward with the initiating a task order with the consultant to conduct the study. The staff report itself, it provides a summary only of the proposed additions and changes. We've also attached the original staff report for your reference, along with the minutes from that November meeting, and also comments we received from Commissioner Linke, just for your reference as to the background. So like I said, for the presentation, I'll just touch on the updates that we are proposing. Firstly, in regards to the vehicle traffic data collection location, so we identified 79 locations total, and this would just be for the vehicle mode analysis. These are locations on arterials, arterial collectors, and industrial streets. I think if you do look at the list and compare them to the first hearing, we've slightly revised some of the topologies and corrected them, mainly in regards to some of the industrial streets. We've relabeled them to be correct. Then the other point in regards to traffic data collection that we wanted to note is that we will be collecting vehicle volume counts as part of the multimodal level of service analysis. So in addition to those 79 locations, we will be collecting many more locations for that MMLOS calculations. Those typologies, they're outlined there on that last bullet. In regards to the traffic volume recount rules, this was an issue that came up in the prior hearing, and we've gone back and clarified for 2020 and 2021. As we will be collecting the counts this year. This year is still it's still a very extraordinary circumstance that we're under in terms of the traffic levels throughout the city. So we've reclarified that to say that the recounts would only be conducted due to equipment failures. And not due to anomalies in the data or deviations from historical trends. The reason being is because, like I said, the counts would be collected under still pandemic conditions, and comparison to historical traffic data would likely be irrelevant just because conditions are so different under our current climate. Probably the main change is just in regards to intersection operations. So we are proposing to conduct intersection operations on all roadways that are identified to be deficient. This would allow us to consider other improvements beyond just mainline segment improvements. So also focusing on improvements at intersections. So these would be things like changes to intersection signal timing, potential for signal timing coordination improvement, travel lane configuration, and even potential bike lane improvements. So we would reconsider looking at all signalized intersections within a deficient facility which receive level circuit E or F. We would also potentially look at some of the unsignalized intersections, and we would evaluate these on more of a case-by-case basis. So looking at intersections which may be good candidates for things like changing intersection control. So are there intersections which maybe we could do a roundabout to improve operations? We'll take a closer look again on a case-by-case basis for those unsignalized locations. And that's a summary of the changes from the November meeting. The next steps for us are to incorporate any additional comments that we received from the Traffic and Mobility Commission today. After that, staff will initiate a task order with a consultant to first conduct the traffic counts, and then commence the multimodal operations analysis for the GMP monitoring report. So with that, I will take any questions or any feedback you have.
Okay, Commissioner comments, questions? Commissioner Linke.
Thank you. All right, I think I have 4 questions. Question 1, so the staff report from November 2nd included a lot more detail than the current report. Is this report just adding to and revising certain parts of the November one, or is this supposed to replace it?
No, this would be, think of it as a supplement. So it would be adding to, the first report is still forming the basis for our approach. This is just to provide an update onto what may have changed or has been added from that,
Okay.
that report.
All right, thanks. Second question, one of the items in our work plan is to review something called the Growth Management Program Annual Traffic Monitoring Manual. And this seems to be sort of a, I don't know if the word is ad hoc, but it's like a temporary one-time thing. Are we still working on a set of like rules to apply to future monitoring as opposed to just year by year? And I guess the one of the reasons for my question is related to the recounts. I mean, I brought that up at the last meeting because of my concern that developers are, in some cases, they don't like the count they get because it's too high and it might require more mitigation. So they do a series of recounts. And I'd like a set of rules that maybe this is more for the TIA guidelines, but so I guess the question is, do we have a plan then to make a permanent manual, or is that changed to changing each year?
Yeah, I think our plan would be to incorporate those types of changes into the TIA guidelines. That way we have clear documentation of how to do these year over year. This was just intended to kind of fill that gap until we get a chance to update the full guidelines, because we really need to move forward with the counts soon and selecting the consultant. So it was just intended to really provide before, until we can update the full guidelines, get sign off on our approach by the commission. Okay,
so there's a new plan not to create this manual that we've talked about before and just incorporate it into the TIA guidelines?
I'd suggest that we move forward with Nathan's approach. We can of course leave it on the work plan, and if we find value in it, we can always create that separate guideline document.
Okay, yeah, but that's fine. I just was clarifying. Incorporating the TIA guidelines is probably a better idea, so that the rules apply both for the GMP monitoring by the city as well as any development that comes in and has to follow the same uniform guideline.
Right.
All right. The third question is, well, it's more of a suggestion that I made the last time, is that I really think that the 2 facilities on Faraday Avenue, which are already incorporated into the service volume table, and the Poinsettia Lane around I-5, there's 2 facilities there that are in the service volume table, that even though they're not currently prioritized for vehicles, that because of the heavy traffic there, that it's useful to monitor it. And then on top of that, the area of Poinsettia that's near Melrose Drive, so the other side. So for whatever reason, and I think I know the answer, but back in 2015, when the street typologies were made up, the 2 ends of Poinsettia, one around I-5 and the other near Melrose Drive, were excluded as transit and school typology, but those are very busy areas, and I think it would be useful to continue to monitor them as they have in the past. So I guess my question is, why shouldn't we, or why can't we monitor Faraday, the ends of Poinsettia, and then the other locations that have been monitored in the past there have been 6 locations along Carlsbad Boulevard, which is a lot of projects going on there, a lot of impacts both vehicle and bicycle and pedestrian traffic, why wouldn't we continue to monitor those as well as Tamarack and La Costa Avenue east of El Camino Real? So adding perhaps 10 additional traffic, just tube counter locations, and keep track of them even though they're not subject to the vehicle priority.
Yeah, Commissioner Link, I see your point. You know, and again, I mean, these are locations like you've pointed out, you know, per the general plan, you know, we don't monitor those for vehicle level of service, of course. So we would have to take a look and see, you know, how applicable or how much flexibility we have in, you know, providing additional monitoring locations, even though it doesn't meet the you know, intent of the general plan. You know, I think, like I said at last meeting, we would be collecting volumes at these locations. So, I mean, we would have some volume data that we could look at and just see how it compares and how things are operating. But I'm hesitant to actually include those in the monitoring report itself, since the general plan doesn't identify them as streets for vehicle monitoring.
Okay, so yeah, that sounds fine to me. I'm not saying they should be included in the GMP monitoring report, but
Okay.
just to collect data to be able to, you know, we want to be a data-driven commission, so having the data, and it's not that expensive to collect, and because they've been collected for 30 years at these sites, it seems like it makes sense to continue. So you're saying that you will be collecting the data there?
Yeah, so for the multimodal level of service, that still requires traffic volumes for an input. So we would be collecting data. All of those streets that you mentioned are within a technology for MMLOS.
Okay, I mean, you also mentioned with MMLOS collecting on like arterial connector streets, and that's not subject to the pedestrian or bicycle level of service, but so I guess that's just sort of the converse argument that you wouldn't include that in the GMP monitoring report either.
Right.
Okay. And the last question doesn't necessarily apply to the current data because of COVID, but one of my other things is these exemptions that shouldn't apply. So we have facilities that are exempt but have never had traffic that would justify them being exempt. And so again, I'm going to suggest that part of the GMP report is to look at historical data and say if the traffic isn't high enough for them to be exempt, they should be unexempted, because there are consequences when you exempt them. Then when a project goes in there, they say, well, we don't have to pay for anything, we just have to do TDM. And then the TDM plans are just waived, as I described in my previous one, and they get away with not doing anything. So there are negative consequences to having facilities be exempt. So I'm going to again make the suggestion that we unexempt facilities that don't need it. I don't know if you have any comment on that.
No, other than that, you know, I think that's something that we're going to have to take a close look at. You know, with the 1920, volumes are going to be much lower. You know, there's going to be, you know, likely very few deficient, if any, segments. You know, I think it's going to be a trend that's going to continue to happen. So we'll have to look at developing an overall policy for how we remove exemptions, because we don't really have one currently that we can use.
Well, I mean, the mobility element requires it. So
right.
It says if an exemption is no longer necessary, it needs to be removed. So I think we need to have that. And I understand that if it's a temporary 1 or 2 year situation where it goes below, we don't need to exempt them for 1 or 2 years. But if it looks like it's going to be long term, then we should unexempt them and look at the consequences of having them exempt versus unexempt.
Yeah. If, as Mr. Schmidt mentioned, we were discussing this, and we think we need to include that analysis and what that looks like going forward in the next growth management plan, which you'll be seeing. So we knew the traffic wasn't going to support. We were not going to have likely deficiency issues, and this issue would be coming up. So we anticipate we'll have to evaluate what that looks like and look at the pros and cons to changing certain facilities to non-exempt.
Ms. Gomez?
Yes, I just wanted to add in that I think Commissioner Linke, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're also referring to some of the exemptions that were perhaps incorporated during the general plan update. The specific ones from, for example, La Costa Avenue, from I-5 to El Camino Real, et cetera. And for those specific ones that were included in the general plan update, that is something that was provided for by City Council, and that's something that we would have to bring forward to them for their decisions, and certainly Traffic and Mobility Commission can make recommendations. So I just wanted to point that out if those are the ones that you are specifically addressing. For the ones that have been exempted by City Council subsequent to the general plan update of 2015, those are the ones that, as we monitor them, we can provide recommendations again to the Traffic and Mobility Commission and to City Council for possible exemptions. So I just wanted to clarify and also confirm that that was what you were referring to, Commissioner Linke.
Yeah, I'm referring actually to all of them, but it certainly includes the ones that were pre-exempted. And we've discussed this before, that whole process. The Planning Commission did not approve those exemptions. The public did not approve those exemptions. That was added by staff after the Planning Commission meeting, right before Council saw it. And I'm happy to provide all the documentation on that process and when it happened. And I wasn't going to file a lawsuit at the time, but I probably could have. And so we needed to relook at that, and I think the Traffic and Mobility Commission should look at those specific facilities and make a recommendation if they really need to be exempt, because there are projects that have gone onto those facilities and have declared, okay, that's exempt, so we don't have to do anything. And so I go ahead.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes, sir. I just wanted to make sure that we understood what you were referring to, and so it was just a matter of clarification.
Right.
And also, we do have a wonderful opportunity that's coming up with City Council doing goal setting next month. We do have a full 5-member council, which will be providing us direction, which we haven't had in over a year. So I think there are opportunities across the board for us to really take a look at not only the growth management program, which I think is one of the things that they are interested perhaps in pursuing, and also maybe if there are other updates, whether it's for the general plan update or things along those lines. I think the opportunity is there if that is City Council's direction, and they should be making those decisions here in the very near future.
Okay, I appreciate that, Ms. Gomez. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else has any comments? Okay, so the staff recommendation is just to receive the presentation and provide input. I believe we did that.